It was late July 2019, and I had decided to go on a solo camping trip across the Peak District in England. I was 27 at the time, working a desk job in Manchester that had slowly started to feel like a cage. The idea of spending a few quiet days surrounded by hills, open air, and no signal sounded perfect. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, a small stove, food for 3 days, a map, and a knife I always kept when hiking. It wasn't my first camping trip, but it was the first time I'd gone completely alone. I parked my car near Edale in the late afternoon and started walking toward a quiet spot I'd marked on the map. It was about a mile away from the main trail, hidden between two ridges, where the land dipped just enough to block the wind. The air was heavy and warm that day, and I remember how quiet everything felt once I got far enough from the main paths. Just the low hum of insects and the occasional sheep call somewhere distant. By sunset, I'd set up my tent and made some noodles on the stove. I sat outside, watching the sky turn orange and pink above the dark outline of the hills. Felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. I hadn't seen another person since I left the car park. I remember thinking how strange it was that no one else had chosen this part of the trail. Most campers preferred areas closer to the main route. Still, the solitude was what I'd come for. When the sun disappeared and the air started to cool, I crawled into my tent, zipped up the entrance, and listened to the distant sound of the wind pushing through the grass. For a while, I lay there just listening until I drifted off. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the faint sound of something moving outside. It wasn't loud, just soft, careful footsteps. My first thought was that it might have been a sheep wandering too close, but it didn't sound right. The steps were slow, heavy, uneven, like someone trying not to make noise. I stayed still, listening, heart starting to beat faster. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. I told myself it was probably nothing and turned to my side, pulling the sleeping bag tighter around me. Just as I was starting to relax, I heard the crunch again, closer this time, grass and soil shifting under weight. Then a quiet, scraping noise, like a shoe sliding slightly against a rock. I sat up slowly, barely breathing. I reached for my flashlight and switched it on, shining it against the tent wall. The light hit the thin fabric and cast a shadow on it. Something tall, standing just a few meters away. The shape was clear enough to make out the outline of a head and shoulders. The figure didn't move. I froze, holding the flashlight still, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I didn't say anything. I didn't even move. After what felt like a full minute, the shadow shifted, and I heard faint footsteps walking away toward the slope. I waited until I couldn't hear anything at all. Then I unzipped the tent just a little, enough to peek out. The moonlight was dim, but I could see the grass glistening with dew. There was no one in sight. My heart was still racing, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the shadow had been from a tree, or my light reflecting weirdly. But the sound of those footsteps, there was no mistaking that. I didn't sleep much after that. I sat awake, listening for hours. Around 4 a.m., when the first hint of blue touched the horizon, I finally relaxed enough to close my eyes again. The next morning, I stepped outside and looked around. The ground near my tent was flattened in places, not where I'd been walking. There were footprints, long, narrow prints that didn't belong to me. I followed them for a few meters until they disappeared into the grass leading up the ridge. I felt uneasy but tried to shake it off. Maybe someone had wandered through late at night, lost or curious. Still, I couldn't ignore how deliberate the footsteps had sounded, slow, cautious, like whoever it was had been watching. I decided to pack my gear and move to a different spot. I hiked for about an hour toward the east, deeper into the valley, until I found another place near a small stream. It felt safer being near water, and I set up my tent again. The day passed quietly. I tried to focus on the beauty around me. The wind moving through the tall grass, the steady hum of insects, the sound of the stream. By evening, I almost convinced myself the night before had been nothing. I cooked dinner, watched the sunset again, and tried to relax. But as the light faded, I started feeling that same heaviness in my chest, that sense of being watched. I kept glancing at the ridge nearby, half expecting to see someone standing there. When night came, I turned off the lantern and sat inside the tent, eyes open, listening. The wind had picked up, brushing the fabric of the tent in waves. Then, around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, not close this time, but moving along the ridge above the camp. Slow, steady, deliberate. I felt every muscle in my body tense up. I didn't turn on my light this time. I just sat there in the dark, gripping the knife I kept beside my sleeping bag. The footsteps went on for a while, then stopped. Silence again. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Then I heard something else. A faint metallic sound, like a chain or a piece of metal brushing against something. That sound pushed me to the edge. I unzipped the tent quietly, enough to peek out. The ridge was faintly lit by the moon, and there, standing near a small cluster of rocks, was a man. I could just make out his shape in the dim light. He was facing my direction, not moving, just standing completely still. He wore a long coat, maybe brown or green, and his hair looked messy and long. He didn't have a light or a backpack. Nothing about him looked like another camper. He just stood there, staring down toward my tent. I stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes, barely breathing, watching him. My whole body was shaking. I didn't know what to do. I thought about yelling or running, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Then, suddenly, he turned and walked along the ridge, slowly disappearing into the darkness beyond the rocks. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I waited until first light, packed everything as fast as I could, and started hiking back toward the car. Every few minutes, I turned around to check behind me. I didn't see him again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somewhere nearby, maybe just out of sight, watching from behind the hills. When I reached the car park around noon, there were a few other hikers getting ready for their walks. Seeing people again felt like a relief. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine. Before I left, I looked around one last time. Up in the distance, near the same ridge I'd camped below, I saw a figure again. Far away, standing still on the hilltop. I couldn't see details from that far, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. I drove off, and I haven't gone camping alone since. A few weeks later, I was reading an article online about hikers reporting a strange man wandering around that area. Several people had seen him near Edale and Kinder Scout, standing far from the trails, always watching but never approaching. No one knew who he was. Some said he might be a hermit living in the woods. Others thought he was just someone unstable who liked to watch people. Whatever the truth was, I know what I saw. The way he moved, the way he stood there silently, it wasn't curiosity. It was something else. Even now, when I drive through the countryside or see open fields, I still get that feeling sometimes. That quiet, sinking feeling that somewhere out there, beyond the trees or over the next hill, someone might be standing still, watching. And it makes me realize how truly alone you can be out there, even in a country as small as this. Every sound, every shadow takes on a different meaning once you've been watched like that. And no matter how long it's been, the memory doesn't fade. It just waits, buried under everything else, until the next time you find yourself somewhere quiet, somewhere far away, where the only sound is the wind moving through the grass, and you start to wonder if you're really alone. It was early September of 2016 when I decided to take my dog, Milo, on a short camping trip. I had been working long hours for months, and I needed to get away from screens, noise, and people. Milo was a medium-sized mixed breed, mostly brown with white paws, full of energy and curiosity. He'd been restless too, always pacing around the apartment, whining by the door every time I picked up my backpack. I figured some time in the woods would do both of us good. I chose a quiet camping spot about 3 hours north of Birmingham, tucked deep in the Peak District. It wasn't one of those busy campgrounds where you can hear other tents flapping or people laughing by the fire. This was a small, barely marked clearing off a long dirt road, surrounded by thick forest and uneven ground. I had been there once before with a friend a couple of years earlier, and I remembered how peaceful it was. No signal, no traffic, just the sound of wind and birds. I left early in the morning. The weather was overcast, cool but not cold. I drove through narrow, winding roads lined with trees that leaned over the path, their branches forming a tunnel. Milo sat in the passenger seat, his head sticking out the window, ears flapping. The air smelled damp and earthy, a mix of rain-soaked leaves and soil. By noon, I reached the spot where the dirt road ended. From there, I had to hike about a mile into the woods with my gear. I packed light, a small tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, a few cans of food, some snacks, water bottles, and Milo's food. The hike wasn't easy, especially carrying everything, but the air felt fresh, and I could hear nothing but my own footsteps, the rustle of Milo moving through ferns, and the occasional call of birds. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The trees were tall and old, their trunks wide, roots twisting over the ground. When I finally reached the clearing, I felt that familiar quiet settle in, the kind that's both peaceful and a little eerie. The ground was mostly flat with patches of soft moss and dry leaves. A small stream ran a few meters away, perfect for washing up and giving Milo water. I set up the tent facing the trees, built a small fire pit, and unpacked everything neatly. Milo kept sniffing around, his tail wagging. The first few hours were calm. I gathered some dry wood, lit a small fire, and sat with Milo by my side, watching the smoke curl up into the air. The sky began to turn orange, and the temperature dropped. The forest made all kinds of soft noises, creaking branches, distant rustles, an occasional splash from the stream. As night crept in, the woods seemed to change. The air got heavier, and even Milo stopped wandering. After eating a simple meal, I lay down near the fire with Milo curled up next to me. The stars were faint behind the clouds, and everything was still except for the fire's low crackle. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, it was completely dark. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the air was colder. Milo was awake, his ears perked, staring toward the trees. At first, I thought he might have heard a fox or a rabbit, but his body was stiff, and a low growl came from his throat. I sat up quietly, trying to listen. I didn't hear anything right away. No footsteps, no rustling, just the faint trickle of the stream and the soft whistle of wind through the leaves. Then, a sharp crack echoed from somewhere in the woods, like a branch snapping under weight. Milo stood, his fur bristling, his growl turning louder. I picked up the flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the edge of the trees. Nothing, just black trunks and thick underbrush. I listened harder, heart thumping. Another sound, slower this time, like footsteps crunching over dry leaves, came from a different direction. It wasn't close, but it was definitely moving. I told myself it was probably a deer. They often wander near camps at night, but something about the sound felt different. It wasn't light or quick. It was steady and heavy, like someone walking carefully, trying not to make noise but failing just enough for me to notice. Milo barked suddenly, loud and sharp, breaking the silence. The sound echoed through the trees, and for a few seconds, everything went dead quiet again. Then there was a faint metallic noise, like something scraping against metal. I swung the flashlight wildly, scanning the area, but I couldn't see anything past the first line of trees. My pulse was racing now, I grabbed Milo's leash, though he kept pulling forward, growling. I added a few more logs to the fire, hoping the light would keep whatever it was away. The warmth of the flames flickered against my tent, but the shadows around us felt thicker now. Every small sound made me jump. I stayed awake for hours, sitting by the fire with the flashlight in one hand, my small camping knife in the other. The sounds would come and go, a faint shuffle here, a quick snap there. Sometimes I thought I saw movement, just a blur between the trees, but when I pointed the light, it was gone. Sometime around 3 a.m., everything stopped. Even the insects went silent. That kind of silence isn't peaceful, it's suffocating. Milo sat close to me, still staring into the dark. My body was tense, my hands freezing, my eyes burning from staying open too long. I must have eventually drifted off again because I woke to gray light spilling through the trees. Milo was lying a few feet away, chewing something. I stood up, stretching my stiff legs, and walked over to him. He was gnawing on an old, dirty piece of fabric. Looked like part of a torn jacket. I froze. It wasn't there the night before. I looked around the camp, my stomach tightening. There were new footprints in the damp soil near the edge of the clearing. Human ones, not mine. They led from the trees toward the spot where I'd been sitting by the fire, then turned back the way they came. I felt a chill run down my back. Whoever or whatever had been out there had come close. Really close. Close enough to watch me while I sat there half asleep. I packed up fast. My hands were shaking as I stuffed everything into my bag. I didn't even bother eating or cleaning up properly. I kept glancing around, expecting to see someone step out from behind a tree. The forest felt different now, too quiet, too still. Milo kept close to me, his tail low. The hike back to the car felt longer than before. Every few minutes, I'd stop and listen, sure I was hearing footsteps behind me. Once I even turned and shouted, but there was no one there. When I finally reached the car, I threw everything into the back, opened the door for Milo, and got in. My hands were trembling so badly I dropped the keys twice before starting the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The dirt road disappeared behind me, swallowed by the trees. My heart was still racing, but there was also this heavy, sinking feeling. The kind that comes when you realize how close you might have been to something you didn't understand, something very real and very human. Later, when I got home, I looked up reports of missing people or break-ins near that part of the Peak District. There were a few vague ones. Campers finding their tents rummaged through, hikers hearing strange noises at night, but nothing concrete. I didn't report what happened. What would I even say? I still go camping sometimes, but never alone anymore, and I never go back to that spot. Sometimes, when Milo hears a noise outside the apartment and growls low, I remember that night. The heavy footsteps, the torn jacket, and those quiet footprints that stopped right where I had been sitting, waiting. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't some creature in the woods. It was just someone out there moving in the dark, close enough to touch. That's what still keeps me up sometimes, not knowing who it was or why they were watching us that night. It was late October 2017 when I decided to spend a few days hunting in the northern part of Montana. The season was just right, the air sharp and cold, the woods quiet except for wind and the occasional cry of a distant animal. I had been working long hours at my job in Billings, and I needed to get away from everything for a while. I wanted silence, space, and the kind of peace you only find miles away from another human being. I drove up alone in my old Chevy pickup, an '03 Silverado with one working headlight and a rattle in the door. The dirt road leading to the national forest looked worse than I remembered. Loose gravel scattered under the tires, and the steering wheel shook constantly. It was about 6 in the evening when I reached the rough clearing where I planned to set up camp, a flat space beside a narrow creek that ran between two ridges. The area was surrounded by pine trees so tall they blocked out most of the sky. I parked the truck, got out, stretched and listened. Nothing, just the low rush of the creek and the faint creak of trees in the wind. I unpacked slowly, pulling out the tent, cooler, folding chair, and rifle case. The ground was cold, but dry. I got the tent up before dark, gathered some firewood, and made a small fire. It crackled softly, giving off that familiar smell of burning pine bark. I cooked a can of chili over the fire, ate with a plastic spoon, then just sat there watching the flames move. I could hear faint movement deeper in the woods. Maybe deer, maybe something smaller. Nothing unusual. By around 10, the fire had burned low. I crawled into my tent, zipped up the sleeping bag, and lay there staring at the thin nylon ceiling. The air was freezing, but I liked that. The stillness of the forest at night always made me feel calm, until I started noticing how loud small sounds become when you're alone. The pop of cooling metal from the fire pit, the soft snap of twigs somewhere out there, the slow, steady trickle of water nearby. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. I woke sometime later, maybe 2, maybe 3 a.m., because of a noise, a deep crunch of something stepping on frozen leaves. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. My eyes opened, heart beating slow but hard. I didn't move. The sound came again, deliberate, heavy steps, then nothing. I told myself it was an elk, or maybe a black bear sniffing around. I reached quietly for the flashlight and unzipped the tent a few inches. The cold hit me right in the face. I shined the light toward the sound. The beam cut through the trees but showed nothing except trunks and fog. The forest looked empty. I turned the light off, zipped the tent back, and waited. No more sounds. Eventually, I drifted back into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I woke to frost coating the ground outside the tent. The air smelled damp and earthy. I boiled some instant coffee, ate a protein bar, and packed my gear for the day. I planned to hike a couple miles up a ridge I'd hunted on before. Good view, plenty of deer trails. The first few hours went fine. I moved slow, careful not to make noise. I saw some tracks, fresh, maybe a day old, heading toward a cluster of aspens. Around noon, I sat on a rock and ate jerky. That's when I noticed something strange. A different set of boot prints crossing the same deer trail. They weren't mine. They looked recent. The treads were deep, and the steps close together, like whoever made them wasn't carrying much gear. I followed them for a few yards before stopping myself. There was no reason to. People hunted here all the time, but something about them bothered me. The pattern was odd, like an older military-style boot, the kind you don't see often anymore. I turned back toward camp around 3. The sun was dropping low already, and the forest began to darken. By the time I reached my clearing, the light had gone gold and cold. I built the fire again, heated another can of chili, and tried not to think about the tracks. As I sat there, I noticed a sound again. Faint, rhythmic, not too close. The same kind of steps I'd heard during the night. They stopped. Then a crack, like a branch breaking underfoot. I stared into the tree line, the firelight flickering against the trunks. I couldn't see anything, but every nerve in my body was tight. I kept listening. Minutes passed. The forest was dead silent now, not even wind. I stayed up later that night, poking at the fire, pretending I wasn't paying attention to the dark. Around midnight, I finally climbed into my tent. I left the rifle beside me, safety off, finger away from the trigger. I wasn't paranoid. I just knew enough not to ignore instinct. At some point, I fell asleep again. I woke up to a noise that made my skin crawl. It was faint but close, something brushing against the fabric of the tent. Slow dragging, like a hand, My heart thumped so hard I could hear it. I didn't move at first. Then I reached for the flashlight, but froze when I heard another sound, the crunch of a footstep right outside. I held my breath. Whoever it was stood there for several seconds. Then silence. I flicked the flashlight on, grabbed the rifle, and unzipped the flap in one quick motion. No one. The clearing was empty. The only sound was the creak and the dying hiss of the fire. I stood there for a long minute, scanning the dark tree line with the light. My breath fogged out in white clouds. Then I saw something hanging from a branch about 20 feet away. A piece of fabric. I walked toward it slowly. It was a strip of orange, torn from one of those cheap safety vests hunters wear. But it was old, sun-bleached, dirty. When I looked closer, I saw faint brown stains on it. It wasn't fresh, but it didn't look right either. I went back to my tent, packed my gear into the truck, and sat inside with the doors locked. The clock on the dash read 3:42 a.m. I stayed awake until the sky started turning gray. When morning came, I stepped out again, uneasy but trying to act normal. I walked toward the edge of the clearing, scanning the ground. That's when I saw the footprints again. The same old boot prints, coming from the trees toward my tent. They stopped right where I'd heard the brushing sound. Then they turned back toward the woods. I followed them for about 50 yards, my breath visible in the cold air. They led toward the creek, crossed it, and disappeared into mud on the far side. I didn't cross. I just stood there, staring across the water, trying to listen for anything at all. Nothing. I stayed one more night because I didn't want to panic over nothing. But I barely slept. I kept the fire going all night, kept the rifle close, and watched the woods until sunrise. Nothing happened again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me from the trees. The next morning, I packed everything up and drove out. On the way back down the dirt road, I stopped near the first bend to check my tires. That's when I noticed something else. Boot prints again, in the soft dirt right behind where my truck had been parked. Same pattern, same spacing. Someone had been standing behind my truck while I was asleep that first night. I didn't report it. There was nothing to report, really. No one had touched my stuff, nothing stolen, no proof of anything. Just footprints, noises, and that strip of orange cloth. But the feeling stayed with me for months. That deep, crawling sense that someone had been out there watching, walking circles around my camp, waiting. I never went back to that part of Montana again. Now, every time I set up camp somewhere, even just a short hunting trip, I double-check everything. I look for boot prints that aren't mine. I clear the area around the tent. I make sure my truck is backed against something solid. I still love the woods, but I don't trust the silence anymore. Because silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it means someone else is listening. It was in the autumn of 2016 when I decided to go camping alone for the first time. I was 28 back then, working as a mechanic in a small town in northern Wales. I had been feeling drained for weeks, and I wanted a few days away from people, away from noise, and away from the same old daily routine. I packed up my old Toyota Hilux, threw my tent and sleeping bag in the back, and drove towards Snowdonia National Park. I'd been there once before with a friend, but this time I planned to go deeper into the forested parts, somewhere near the base of the Cairn Mountains where few hikers went. By the time I parked the truck on a muddy track that cut through the trees, the sky was heavy and dark. It had that look that promised rain, but I didn't care much. I liked the sound of rain when I camped. I set up my small green tent near a slope overlooking a shallow stream. The forest smelled of wet earth and pine. The air felt cold and thick, but peaceful in that quiet way forests are before a storm. I collected some wood and started a fire before the rain could start. The smoke rose straight up, which meant the wind was calm for now. I cooked a can of beans and sausage over the fire and ate slowly, staring at the stream below. It was narrow, but it moved fast, bubbling around stones and fallen branches. I remember thinking that it would be nice to just sleep early, wake up to the sound of birds, maybe hike up the ridge in the morning. That plan didn't last long. The first drops of rain started around 8. They were light at first, just tapping against the tent. I put my fire out properly, just in case, and crawled into my sleeping bag. The sound of the rain grew louder, steady and heavy. It was relaxing for a while. I must have dozed off, but I woke up again not long after. I didn't know what time it was, but it was pitch dark. The rain was louder now, pounding against the tent like gravel. The wind had picked up too, making the trees creak. I lay there for a while, listening to the forest, trying to fall back asleep. But there was something about the sound that didn't feel right anymore. I couldn't explain it. Just this low sense of wrongness creeping in, like the night itself was shifting around me. After a while, I heard something. It wasn't just rain or wind. It was a sound that stood out from everything else. It was faint at first, something like crunching leaves, slow and irregular. I thought it was maybe an animal, a fox or deer, but then it stopped completely. Silence, just the rain again. I told myself to ignore it. I turned on my side, zipped my sleeping bag up to my chin, and tried to calm my breathing. But a few minutes later, there it was again. Closer this time, the distinct sound of footsteps in wet soil. I lay perfectly still, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the steps were too slow, too heavy to be an animal. They stopped right outside my tent. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my neck. The rain made it hard to hear clearly, but I could make out the soft squelch of boots in mud, maybe 2 or 3 feet away from me. Then I heard what sounded like fabric moving, like someone adjusting their jacket. Whoever it was, they were standing still, facing my tent. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Every part of me screamed to do something, but I was frozen. After maybe half a minute, I heard the sound again. Footsteps moving away, slowly fading into the rain. I stayed awake for a long time after that, just listening, every muscle tense. I checked my phone, 1:47 a.m. I thought about turning on my flashlight, but I didn't. The idea of light spilling through the tent made me feel exposed, like it would draw attention. I stayed still until my eyes grew heavy again. At some point, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, it was early morning. The rain had stopped, but everything was soaked. The air was misty and cold. My first thought was that maybe I imagined everything, that I just spooked myself. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, the ground soft and muddy under my boots. I walked around, looking for footprints, half expecting to find nothing. But about 10 feet away from my tent, I found them, clear prints in the mud. Human prints. They circled the area once and then went back toward the woods. I followed them for a short distance, but they disappeared among the trees where the ground was too covered in wet leaves. I felt uneasy but tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a hiker who got lost in the rain, or someone cutting through the woods. I packed my things quickly. The plan was to drive down toward the village and maybe find another campsite later. But when I got back to the track, my stomach dropped. My truck was sitting where I left it, but the driver's side door was open. I hadn't left it that way. I froze, staring at it for a long second. The rain from the night had left everything slick and shining, but I could see clear handprints on the door, on the glass, and even the side mirror. I walked up slowly, my pulse racing. The inside looked mostly untouched, but my backpack from the passenger seat was gone. It had some food, a flashlight, and my hunting knife in it. The glove compartment was open too, papers scattered across the seat. Nothing else was missing, though. Whoever had been there didn't take the keys, didn't touch the fuel, didn't steal the phone charger or my wallet. Just that one bag. I started the truck and left the forest without looking back. The road was slick and narrow, twisting between the hills, and I drove slower than usual. My hands were shaking. The further I got, the more I started to think. If that person had come to my tent, then to my truck, what were they looking for? Why take only a few things? I couldn't make sense of it. I reached the main road by noon and stopped at a small petrol station. I washed my hands in the sink, splashing cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like hell. Mud on my neck, eyes red, jaw tight. I stood there for a long time before getting back in the truck. I didn't go camping again for months after that. When I finally did, I made sure to pick well-known spots, near other people, near noise, near light. But every time it rained at night, I thought about that night in the forest. The sound of slow footsteps outside my tent, the quiet pause right before they stopped, and the prints in the mud the next morning. Sometimes, when I think back, what unsettles me most isn't that someone was out there watching me. It's that they didn't do anything. They didn't speak, didn't steal much, didn't leave a mark except for those muddy footprints and the feeling that I was never really alone that night. Years later, when I told a ranger about it, he said that sometimes people who live rough in the forests come down from the hills during storms, looking for supplies or food. Some of them wander for days, avoiding towns. They don't talk, don't make contact, just pass through camps quietly, taking what they need. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was just some drifter looking for a meal or a dry blanket. But I know what I heard. Those steps weren't aimless. Whoever it was stood right next to me, listening, breathing. They could have opened the tent if they wanted. They didn't, and that thought has stuck with me ever since. That someone was there, inches away in the dark, deciding what to do next. And for some reason, they decided to let me sleep. I went camping alone in the summer of 2017. I was 26 then, living in Colorado, working long hours at a small auto repair shop. My life had started to feel dull, the kind of routine that makes every week feel the same. I hadn't been out in nature for years, and one Friday after work, I decided to pack up and drive out into the woods for the weekend. I left early Saturday morning. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going, just said I'd be out camping for a couple of days. I drove about 4 hours west toward Gunnison National Forest, a huge stretch of land with rivers, pine forests, and not many people. I had my tent, sleeping bag, some food, and my .22 rifle, mostly for small game or safety. It was mid-July, hot in the daytime but cool at night. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing not too far from a slow, winding river. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. The ground was soft and covered with needles. It felt peaceful, quiet except for the sound of running water and a few distant birds. I set up my tent near a large fallen log, built a small fire, and cooked a can of beans. The heat faded slowly and the forest turned dark, the kind of deep dark where your flashlight beam feels small and weak. That first night, I slept surprisingly well. I woke up a couple of times to the sound of rustling outside, probably deer or raccoons. Nothing unusual. When I got up in the morning, I fished by the river for a while and caught nothing. The day was warm and still. I walked down the bank, following the curve of the river for maybe half a mile, just exploring. I noticed something strange. On a muddy patch near the edge, there were footprints. Human footprints. Bare feet. They weren't mine. I was wearing boots. The prints were narrow, longer than average, and they looked fresh, maybe from the night before. The mud was still damp, and there were more heading deeper into the woods, away from the river. I told myself it was probably just another camper, maybe someone swimming or washing up. It didn't really bother me then, just made me feel like I wasn't as alone as I thought. Later that afternoon, I gathered some firewood and cooked another meal. The sun went down behind the trees around 8. The woods turned quiet again. Too quiet. Usually you hear insects and birds until late, but around 9 it was dead silent. No wind, no frogs, nothing. It gave me an uneasy feeling, but I tried to ignore it. I sat by the fire for a while, staring into the flames. I remember hearing a splash from the river, loud, like someone had thrown a rock or jumped in. My flashlight beam cut through the trees and reflected off the water, but I didn't see anything. I listened. Nothing. No ripples, no movement. Just stillness again. I went into the tent after midnight, zipped it up, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. Every little sound outside felt louder than it should have been. A twig snapping, leaves crunching. I kept my rifle next to me, loaded. At one point, I heard something that didn't sound like an animal. It was slow, heavy steps moving through the dirt, stopping, then starting again. It wasn't near the tent at first, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, but it got closer. I didn't move. I just laid there, holding my breath, gripping the rifle. The steps stopped just outside my tent. I could hear the faint sound of breathing, not fast or panicked, just calm, steady breathing. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, it moved again. I heard the steps walk away toward the river, crunching over the pine needles until the sound faded. I waited a long time before unzipping the tent and shining the flashlight outside. The fire was dying down to embers. The trees looked normal. The river was still. I didn't see anyone, but there were footprints again, the same bare feet, a few yards from the tent, leading toward the water. I barely slept after that. When the sky started turning light gray, I got up. The air was cold, and mist hung over the river. I went to check the footprints again. They were clearer in daylight, and I noticed there were 2 sets this time, one coming from the woods toward my tent, and another going back the other way. I decided I was done camping there. I started packing up fast. I didn't even eat breakfast. I threw everything into the truck and drove off down the dirt road leading out of the forest. But after maybe 10 minutes, I realized something that made my stomach drop. I had left my cooler behind, near the river. It had all my food, some tools, and my phone charger in it. Against my better judgment, I turned around to go get it. When I got back, the campsite looked different. The fire pit had been scattered, and my tent, which I'd left standing, was unzipped and flattened. It looked like someone had stepped on it. The cooler was gone. I walked slowly toward the river, scanning the ground. I saw it sitting about 10 feet away from the water, turned on its side, lid open. There were muddy handprints on it, real hands, not animal paws. And next to it, right by the water's edge, was something worse. A small pile of things that weren't mine. A pair of torn jeans, filthy and damp, a broken flashlight, and an old, dirty sleeping bag, half buried in mud. I backed away slowly. The woods were quiet again, but I felt eyes on me. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight. I didn't see anyone, but I knew someone had been there, maybe living out there, watching. I got in my truck and left, faster this time. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. When I finally got a signal on my phone, I called the local sheriff's office and told them what I found. They sent someone to check the area later that day. A few days later, a deputy called me back. He said they found signs that someone had been camping illegally out there for a while. Old fire pits, animal bones, bits of clothes. They didn't find anyone, but they said the spot had been used recently, maybe by a squatter or a drifter. They told me it wasn't uncommon, that some people lived deep in the woods like that, moving from one spot to another, surviving off whatever they could find. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the breathing outside my tent. Whoever it was must have been standing just a few feet from me, quiet, calm, maybe just watching, maybe waiting for me to fall asleep. I haven't been camping alone since then. Sometimes I still think about that person, barefoot, living out there, watching campers from the shadows. Maybe they were harmless. Maybe they were just curious. But the way they stood there that night, so still, so close, I don't think they were just passing through. Whenever I drive past a forest now, I look at the trees differently. They don't feel peaceful anymore. They feel like they're hiding something, like someone's still out there, living in the quiet parts of the woods where nobody goes, waiting for another firelight to appear through the trees. And if I ever hear that slow, heavy breathing again, I know I'll never wait to see who it is. It was late September of 2017 when I decided to take a short solo camping trip in northern Arizona. I had just finished a stressful month at work and wanted a few quiet days away from everything. I packed light, a tent, a sleeping bag, a small cooler, and some food. My plan was to camp along a narrow valley off an unmarked dirt road about an hour north of Flagstaff. The spot wasn't an official campsite, but I'd been there once before with a friend years ago, and it had a small clearing near a creek. The weather that week was clear, the air dry and cold at night. I drove up early in the morning, leaving pavement behind after about 30 miles, bouncing slowly along rough dirt tracks surrounded by open land and scattered juniper trees. The kind of quiet you get in that part of Arizona feels heavy. It's not just silence, it's like the land absorbs sound. By early afternoon, I found the spot. The clearing looked untouched, no tire marks or trash. The creek beside it was low, trickling quietly between rocks. I set up my tent a little away from the water, near a small ridge that offered some shelter from the wind. I gathered a bit of dead wood for a small fire later, unpacked my cooler, and sat for a while just listening. Everything felt fine that first day. I hiked a bit upstream, took some photos, came back before sunset, and made myself a simple dinner. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. I sat by the fire for a few hours, watched the stars come out one by one, and eventually went to sleep around 10. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I couldn't tell why at first. There was no clear noise, no light, just that strange, immediate alertness that makes your body tense before your mind catches up. The fire was long dead, and my tent was almost pitch black except for faint moonlight. I lay still, listening. Then I heard it. It was faint but distinct. A scraping sound, like something dragging lightly over dirt and stone. Not far away, maybe 20 feet from my tent. It stopped for a few seconds, then started again, slow and uneven. I tried to convince myself it was an animal. There are coyotes, maybe a raccoon, possibly even a stray cow wandering around. But something about the rhythm felt wrong. Too heavy for a small animal, too slow for a deer. I stayed still for a long time, counting every second that passed. The scraping eventually stopped. I didn't hear any footsteps leaving, no rustle of bushes, nothing. I waited maybe 20 more minutes before forcing myself to relax again. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, though it wasn't deep or peaceful. The next morning, I stepped out of the tent expecting to see nothing, but there were marks in the dirt. Shallow, thin grooves that trailed past the tent and down toward the creek. I crouched to look closer. They weren't paw prints, not shoe prints either. Just lines like someone had dragged a stick or a long hand with fingers spread wide. I tried not to think too much about it. Probably an animal, maybe a raccoon clawing at something in the dirt. The day went normally after that. I went hiking again, explored a nearby ridge, took some photos, and returned before dark. I kept replaying the noise from the night before, but I told myself not to make a big deal of it. Being alone makes small things feel larger. Still, I gathered more firewood than I needed and kept the fire going brighter that night. It was close to midnight when I woke up again, this time to a very faint, distant sound. It was like a soft yelp or bark, but it was drawn out in a way that didn't sound right. Coyotes sometimes cry at night, but this sounded different, almost like a person imitating one, missing the tone. It echoed faintly off the valley walls. I sat up slowly, heart already beating faster. Then came footsteps, very slow, crunching softly on gravel, somewhere between the trees near the creek. I could tell it wasn't a four-legged gait. It was too steady. 2 steps, pause. 2 steps, pause. I didn't move, didn't even breathe for a few seconds. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it through the thin tent fabric. The light didn't reach far, but I could see faint movement outside. Something tall was standing near the edge of the clearing. I couldn't make out details, just a shape, upright, long, and oddly still. It looked human, but the shoulders seemed wrong, slightly uneven. I wanted to yell, but something held me back. Instead, I stayed frozen, gripping the flashlight. After maybe half a minute, the shape moved, just slightly, a twitch of its head, then slowly turned and walked toward the trees. I heard the crunch of footsteps fade away. I sat there until dawn, not sleeping at all. When daylight came, I stepped outside carefully, every sound amplified in my head. The ground where I saw the figure was flattened, with fresh tracks. They looked human at first glance, but longer, like someone had pressed their heel deep and dragged the front of their foot forward. The stride was irregular, too wide in some spots, too narrow in others. I told myself I'd had enough. I packed everything quickly, stuffed the tent and sleeping bag into the car, and started driving out. The dirt road felt endless, and every minute I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. About 5 miles out, I saw something up ahead near the side of the road. A figure standing by a tree. At first I thought it was just another camper, maybe a hiker. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It looked almost like me. Same build, same short hair, same green jacket I was wearing. But the face, even from a distance, it didn't look right. The features seemed blurred, like someone trying to copy a face from memory and getting it slightly wrong. I slowed down instinctively, and the figure tilted its head just a bit, the same odd movement I'd seen the night before. I didn't stop. I kept driving. I didn't look back again until I hit pavement nearly half an hour later. When I got home, I dumped everything from the trip into the garage and didn't touch it for days. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw because I didn't have the words to describe it without sounding insane. But the image stayed in my head. That strange, half-familiar figure standing by the road, watching me leave. A week later, I finally checked my camera's photos. Most were normal, trees, rocks, the creek. But one picture, taken on the second afternoon, caught my attention. I hadn't noticed it before. In the background, at the far edge of the clearing, there was a figure among the trees. It looked like a person, tall, facing slightly away from the camera. The face wasn't visible, but the posture, the angle of the head, the arms hanging slightly too long, matched what I'd seen that night. That was the last time I went camping alone. Now, even years later, I can still remember every detail. The sound of the scraping dirt, the marks near my tent, that distorted coyote call. I can't prove what I saw, and I don't try to anymore. But I know this much. Out there, in those wide, empty places where light fades and sound carries for miles, there are things that can watch you, things that learn how to look like us, not perfectly, just close enough to make you doubt what you saw. And sometimes, when I drive through the desert at night, I still see shapes by the road. Most times it's just rocks or trees in the headlights, but every now and then one of them looks back. It was early September 2016. I was 25, living in Bristol, England, and working long weeks at a construction site. When the weekend came, I just wanted to get away from everything, the noise, the people, the constant movement. A few co-workers had told me about a quiet camping spot near Snowdonia, in North Wales, a few hours from the city. I had been there once before, years ago, but barely remembered it. So that Friday after work, I packed up my small tent, a sleeping bag, a few snacks, and my old flashlight, and drove north through the evening rain. By the time I reached the area, the sun was gone, the sky a dull navy blue. I found a rough dirt track leading into the woods, followed it for about a mile, and parked near a clearing surrounded by tall trees. The air smelled like wet soil and pine, that heavy, earthy scent you only get after rain. I set up my tent under a cluster of trees, close to a narrow stream that ran downhill. The sound of water trickling over rocks mixed with the faint rustle of wind through the branches. Felt peaceful, almost too quiet. I lit a small campfire and sat beside it, eating from a tin of beans and some bread. The fire hissed every time a drop of water hit it from above. It wasn't raining anymore, but the trees were dripping constantly. I could hear the occasional distant crack of a branch somewhere deeper in the woods, but I didn't think much of it. Woods make all sorts of sounds at night. You learn that fast if you camp enough. After a while, the heat from the fire faded and I crawled into my tent. The ground was uneven, and I had to adjust my sleeping bag a few times to get comfortable. I left the fire half alive outside, just embers glowing red under a bit of smoke. My flashlight was next to me, my knife tucked near my backpack. I wasn't expecting trouble, but I always like to keep things close, just in case. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. At some point later, I woke up, not suddenly, just slowly aware that I was awake. It was completely dark except for a faint gray light from the half moon outside. I could hear the stream still running and a soft tapping noise, like light footsteps or dripping water. I thought maybe it was just rain starting again, so I lay there for a while, listening, but the sound didn't have the rhythm of rain. It was uneven, soft, and stopped every now and then. Started again, closer this time, crunching sounds on the damp ground. It wasn't heavy, not like a big animal. Maybe a fox, I thought, or a deer, but the steps sounded slower, careful, like something trying not to make noise. My stomach tightened. I turned on my flashlight and shone it at the tent wall. The thin fabric glowed pale white, nothing visible outside. I waited, breathing quietly. Then I heard it again, a faint rustle directly behind the tent. I switched off the light immediately. The last thing I wanted was to let anything know exactly where I was looking. I lay still, every muscle tensed. A few seconds later, I heard the sound again. Footsteps circling the tent, stopping every few feet. My chest felt tight. There was no wind, no rain now, just that sound moving slowly around me. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was some other camper who wandered too far. Maybe they saw my fire earlier. But who walks around someone's tent in the middle of the night without saying anything? I decided to wait it out. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. Total silence. Then, from outside, came a new noise. A soft scraping, like something dragging across the side of my tent. I sat up, gripping the flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other. The scraping moved from one side to another, then stopped. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I wanted to yell, but something in me said not to make a sound. I waited again, counting seconds in my head. 1 minute passed. 2. Nothing. Eventually, I heard slow footsteps moving away, fading into the trees. I didn't sleep again that night. I just sat there in the dark, waiting for light. The woods never felt so alive. Every creak, every drip, every tiny sound made me jump. When the first bit of pale blue morning light came through, I finally unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The air was freezing, mist hanging low over the ground. The forest looked normal, quiet, untouched. But near the edge of my campfire, I noticed something odd. There were footprints, not animal prints, but shoe prints, leading from the trees to my tent. They circled it once, then went off toward the stream. I crouched to look closer. The prints were deep, from boots, maybe size 10 or 11. The pattern looked like a work boot sole, heavy and worn. I followed them a little just to see. They led through the wet grass, past the stream, then disappeared into the thicker woods. I stopped when I realized how far from camp I'd gone. The silence was heavy again. No birds, no movement, just cold, damp air and the faint echo of water running behind me. Back at my camp, I started packing fast. I didn't even bother making breakfast. I just threw everything in the car and got out of there. I drove down that dirt road faster than I should have, heart still pounding even when I reached the main road. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe some hiker wandering around who saw my firelight and got curious. But deep down, it didn't feel like that. There was something about the way those steps moved around my tent, slow and steady, like whoever it was knew I was inside. That night, when I got home, I unpacked my bag and noticed something that made my stomach drop again. The small folding shovel I kept for digging fire pits was missing. I remembered using it before I went to sleep to cover the edges of the fire, but it wasn't in the bag, not in the car either. Maybe I left it near the fire pit, I thought, but I couldn't shake the thought that whoever was out there might have taken it. I didn't go camping alone again after that. For weeks, I kept thinking about those footprints and that slow scraping on the tent. I kept replaying it all, wondering if I should have stepped out and checked, or maybe shouted. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe staying quiet was what kept me safe that night. A month later, while scrolling through local news online, I came across a short article. It was about a hiker found dead not far from Snowdonia, around the same area I had camped. The man had been missing for days before someone discovered his tent torn apart and his belongings scattered. There were no signs of an animal attack, and the police suspected foul play. I don't know if it was connected, but the place they mentioned in the article, the stream, the slope, the forest trail, it all matched the area I'd been in. I just stared at that photo for a long time, the one showing the police cars lined up at the forest edge. Even now, when I think about it, I can still hear those slow steps circling the tent and that faint scraping sound along the side. I try to tell myself it was nothing, just some lost camper, maybe a drunk wanderer. But deep down, I know that whoever it was out there wasn't lost. They were watching. They knew I was alone. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see those footprints leading away into the woods and wonder if somewhere out there, not too far from where I camped, they stopped circling tents only after they found one with someone who didn't wake up.